So we wanted to begin with a clear definition of what stress is, just an understanding or a basic level understanding of stress and recognizing that stress is our natural response or reaction to any sort of change in our life, any change, sometimes expected, unexpected, and it doesn't have to be negative. It can be positive change, promotion, a move, anything along those lines. And so our bodies either will do something physically, mentally, and or emotionally to adapt to that change. And so I think we can all agree that given the recent health crisis with the COVID-19 pandemic, we all are experiencing, shall we say, a next level amount of stress, if you will. And so we wanted to open up the chat tonight, starting with what are some of your coping skills? What do we do? What are some typical things that you find yourself doing when a situation, when stress, you find yourself in a stressful situation? What are some things that you do, some of your coping skills? And so, of course, you can use the chat if you'd like to share some of those. And Tori's going to share a few that might come to mind.
Yeah, so as you all are either are typing in the chat, if you have the capability, some of your typical coping skills, like we said, we thought we would share a few of our own. So one of my go-to coping skills is just listening to music. And sometimes my listening to music just means playing it and just sitting and journaling, or sometimes it means dancing around the house, right? So whatever it is, I have little playlists that I will play depending on what mood I'm in. That typically help me to cope, whether it be after a long day or even in the morning if I'm just preparing for a longer day or something like that. So that's one of my go-tos.
And that would you consider, would you say is one of the more healthy coping skills? Because we certainly have some that are a little bit more, shall we say, unhealthy. And so for those, my fellow foodies out there, we know that some of us cope by eating, in some cases, unfortunately, overeating. But I always like to, when I introduce what would be considered a negative with a positive. So I'm one of those. I'm a foodie. I love it. Might not cook as much as I should, but love eating, dining out, just hanging out with friends and family and eating. And so while that is one of my coping skills, the other one that offsets that is working out. And so I can get in my zone. I can certainly get in my zone when I'm working out. I go to the gym, I can go for a walk or a run, but again, a more healthy form of coping with stress on any given day. So yeah, just wanted to open up with that and ask you all to just begin to think about what you normally do, because right now we're not doing what we normally do. We have a very, what one would consider abnormal situation with the current pandemic. So thinking in terms of what we typically do. And so with that being said.
So some that we see in the chat are finding a quiet place to clear your mind, which is awesome. I see taking walks. I see just liking to get outside in general. So those are all awesome, healthy coping. And again, I'm just wanting to put that sort of discussion question out there, something to be thinking about as we sort of work through this very brief presentation that we're going to share with you. Working out, we see walking. So all those are awesome. It sounds like you guys are getting outside quite a bit, so that's awesome. Cleaning is an awesome one too. So thanks for sharing. So moving on to our next slide. This is just a small graphic that I wanted to share with you all. This is something that I share with my clients all the time. It's this concept that is called window of tolerance. So for those of you that can see the graphic, hopefully for those visual learners, you have that available to you. Even if you can't see it, I'll try to explain it so that you kind of can have a picture in your mind. So window of tolerance. So the idea here is that your window of tolerance is sort of your optimal level of functioning, right? So you may encounter stress, but it feels manageable. It doesn't feel too overwhelming. You're within a level, things feel manageable for you. You're able to engage with both reason and emotion equally and well. You feel you're feeling good, right? And then when we experience significant levels of stress, or when we experience even crisis or trauma, whatever it may be, those higher levels of stress, we have a tendency to either feel more hyper aroused or hypo aroused. So that hyper arousal state is going to be those more anxious feelings. Some of us may know it as the fight or flight response, right? So we're feeling really anxious. We're feeling our normal coping techniques are no longer working for us. We may feel an abundance of energy, may feel like we need to get out, may feel like we're stuck inside our bodies, something along those lines. It just feels very overwhelming, right? And again, that fight or flight response, we're gonna want to figure out a way to fix it, right? We're fixing things. And then the other response would be the hypoarousal state. So this would be the opposite. This would be the response where we may feel a little bit more down, a little bit more depressed. Maybe we're having a hard time getting out of bed, or maybe we're having a hard time communicating what we're feeling, or getting out of the house, or feel like doing anything at all. It could be even, we may not even feel like putting on clothes that day or showering, whatever it is, we're just having a harder time. So the idea is that as time goes on, the hope is that we would increase our level of tolerance, so that when we are met with adverse situations, that things still feel manageable. But the reality is that sometimes, if we don't have the proper coping techniques, if we don't have what I like to call our toolbox kind of built up, it can be harder to stay within that window of tolerance. So the idea here is sharing this with you all to first of all validate that those hyperarousal and hypoarousal states will come, but hopefully we can help give you all some tools that when you feel those triggers coming, so that you're able to recognize a little bit more and kind of retreat back to that baseline level.
And so we're going to share a few of our stress management tips.
Yes.
And we'll move to our next slide. And so while there are many, we narrowed it down to 5 that we thought spoke directly to the current health crisis that we're in. And so management tips for COVID-19. Our first one, as we move to that slide, our first one is limiting time on social media and watching news. And I find that this is different for the generations, huh? So we're right now currently sharing our space, and by we, myself and my husband, with our three adult children, if you will. And so social media and news and real news, we'll go with the networks that are around the clock giving updates on coronavirus across the globe, just limiting that. You're used to, I find that the 30s and unders are used to scrolling through social media, but that constant exposure can be harmful right now. We're already, for the most part, in a state of uncertainty, worry, fear in some cases, just depending on, number one, where you are physically, certainly where you are spiritually. And so just limiting that time. There should be obviously enough time given just to be updated and made aware of what's going on. We certainly don't want to lose that, but we want to be very careful that we're not just pouring that in all day, every day, because it's so easy, because that's what's on right now. That's you flip on social media, any of your social media outlets, and people are sharing, this is what's going on here, or whatever. And so, in news as well. And so, limiting that time and being mindful of those of us that have children, smaller children in the house, making sure that we're checking what they're watching as well. And so, again, limiting that time will reduce our feelings of fear and worry. Second, creating new routines. The reality is this, our old routines, most of them just are not working. They're not as effective as they normally are. And so parents who don't typically work from home are working from home right now. Children are online, they're in school online. And so we are all around the clock, all day, every day in the house with one another. And so just creating new routines and understanding that the old routines, those are going to be out of the window for a while, and in some cases continuing beyond the pandemic. And so our third, planning activities. And this helps pass away the time as well, just coming up with things to do in that space. If weather permits, going outside, and we notice through the text chat that several people are indulging in working out and just spending time outside. We saw planting and in the garden and things like that. And so finding activities outside if weather permits. Games, puzzles, crafting. We are all in our household, we have become Uno and spades champions because we're doing a lot of that, but we also pulled out some board games as well, and just being mindful of something that's stimulating. We want to do some activities that are stimulating to us as well. Reading, and even although this is less stimulating, binge watching. I personally don't do a lot of TV, but hanging out with everybody else in our household, where we have succumbed to a couple of episodes of Billions and some reality TV. And so I'm just taking some time to plan some activities. And so, because what you'll find is that the day, and now what we're in our second, in some cases for those that have been quarantined a bit longer, 3, just the days and weeks are just starting to roll into one another. It's just like one long day, one long week, if you will. And so taking some time to plan out our days and obviously our weeks. Number 4, checking in with yourself and others. While that might sound or seem obvious, it's okay to just kind of take a breather and be okay with where you are in your space, physically, mentally, and emotionally right now. Okay, this is taking its toll. This is how I'm feeling. Just acknowledging that and recognizing that you may feel a little off, given that you're confined for so long, and then checking in with others as well. And by that I mean checking in with others in your household. Again, we gave all the examples of some things that you might do with creating new activities and planning activities, but just checking in with those, if you don't live by yourself, just feeling where everybody is, where everybody's temperament is. How are you feeling about what's going on? In some cases, every week, some jobs are being shot out much longer. You get 13th and then May 4th and May 6th and so on. So just checking in with everybody in your household as well. And then 5th, still connecting on the outside. My mom and sisters are in Ohio right now. And so while my normal weekly, or maybe 2 times a week calls to my mom, those are a little bit more regular now, just checking in to make sure that, she's doing well. So staying connected to everybody on the outside as well. And then something I've been introduced to, again, since we have 3 under 30s in our household, are the virtual hangouts and all of those activities, virtual book clubs and things like that. And so still connecting with people on the outside, if you will, outside of your space, your apartment, your home, whatever. But, understanding that while we may or have to recognize social distancing, that doesn't mean that we're completely shut off from everyone.
Yeah, so I'm going to take us on home with our final slide here, just offering a few takeaways. I do want to preface this with, these are just a few takeaways that we hope you all will be able to, again, add to your toolbox or have in your back pocket moving forward, but we also encourage you to think of your own takeaways, other things that stuck out to you, and include those as well. So number 1 is just going to be aware of your window of tolerance, right? So that first graphic that I shared with you all, being aware of where your baseline is and recognizing when you're maybe operating outside of that, and developing coping that can get you back into that sort of that middle range, that window where things feel manageable, where things feel tolerable. You're not feeling like you want to pull your hair out, nor are you feeling like you just want to be locked away in your room all day, right? So that sort of middle ground there. The second is going to be gracious with yourself, right? So I think I can pretty comfortably say that this is something that none of us have ever experienced quite exactly like this. And nobody is good at doing anything for the very first time, right? So be gracious with yourself, be patient with yourself, recognize that every day is not going to be a great day. In fact, most days probably won't be necessarily great days, but knowing that that's okay, and that, things will come up, things will shift, and giving yourself flexibility around that. And then the final one is going to be to lean into your new normal, right? So not sitting hoping and holding on to the day when things return back to normal or when things are okay again. But even considering the question, what if things don't ever go back exactly to the way they were? How will I prepare for that? How will I adjust to that? I found that the more that we lean into things, the less threatening they feel, and the more we're able to sort of get in our groove and figure it out. So those are just a few things that we want to share with you all. Hopefully that was helpful. And again, we'll try our best to answer a few questions, again, to the best of our ability, if y'all have any.
Question for you.
Okay.
So what is the difference between panicking and feeling anxiety? And then how do you control that?
Yes, so I will again attempt to answer that question. Something I would just, again, another little preface before I answer this question. Something I always tell my clients is that although I am the, so to speak, counselor, I never like to be viewed as the expert by any means. I like to be viewed as someone that has helped guiding you to your own answer to whatever is best for you. But I always will reflect things back to you, offer feedback when I can. So with that being said, I think the main difference I'm thinking of between anxiety and panic is that panic would be the extreme of anxiety. So I think anxiety is something that we probably feel, I won't say every day, but that it's not an uncommon feeling necessarily. I think panic is when it becomes crippling, when we're not able to continue operating. And I think panic more often has those physiological responses. So maybe we're sweating, maybe we feel like we can't breathe, shortness of breath, whatever it is. So I think panic is, I would say that's probably the primary difference between the two. And ways to bring yourself back down, there are several things. One of the main things I like to recommend is grounding techniques. And what grounding is just really being aware of your surroundings. So it could be something as simple as, oh, look at the pillow over there, or look at the color of, the birds outside, or just noticing the little things. It helps to bring you back to the moment and not feel so anxious or panicked. A lot of times when we're anxious about something, we're usually worrying about something. So bringing yourself back to the present moment really helps to ground you. There's also a number of breathing techniques that I have found and clients have found to be really helpful. That could be just, inhaling for 4, exhaling for 8, whatever it is. So breathing and grounding are two quick go-to techniques. Yeah.
And then another question that we have is, how do you manage your anxieties when it feels like you have continued stressors taking place, one after another? So you have things that keep coming up, basically, I think is the question.
Sure. Yes. Yes. So I think that is probably pretty normal. I think that's like feeling I think that's when we feel most anxious, right? When things come up, when it feels like things are happening back to back. And like we can't get a grasp on things. Like before we can even deal with one stressor, there's another stressor coming up. And so I think with that, literally writing out what's going on can be helpful. It can kind of help get it out of you, and just looking at it can make it feel more manageable. So that could be in the form of a to-do list. That could be in the form of just what emotions you're feeling. Like sometimes literally seeing it helps to makes it not tangible, but makes it seem more manageable, right? So, and then also thinking through like, what is one step that I can take today to get closer to my goal, right? So not looking at a problem as how do I solve it all in this one, in this one setting, but what is one step that I can take today to get a little bit closer to managing this? And that also helps to alleviate a little bit of that stress as well.
And to expound on that question, so what Christian principles can be applied to managing stress?
Do you want to take that one, or do you want me to take it? No. Okay. So I think praying, right? So for me, just knowing that there's God who's bigger than myself is oftentimes enough for me, right? So I think a lot of times we can get caught up in our own, like what is happening right here, right now. And we forget about like the bigger picture, right? So like what all does this really mean? What am I doing this all for? And knowing that, I have God typically is enough for me, knowing that I have someone to talk to pray. Maybe you have a mentor in your church that you look up to. Any of those things, reading your Bible, any of those things I think can be pretty comforting. Even writing down scriptures and putting them on your mirror, something that you reflect on daily, can be helpful too.
Talk a little bit about trust as well.
Trust.
Yeah.
Okay.
Principle.
Okay. Yeah. And you want to talk about it?
And so, just understanding that, if we're trusting him, we understand that there is an end to all of this at some point. And so our focus definitely is right now on how do we get through this and how do we get through this successfully, this being COVID-19, this pandemic, this social distancing, this quarantine, this being away from our family, not being as connected, trusting, just understanding that at the base of all this, we know that we're going to come out on the other side and we're going to come out successfully. And so for me, that, as you said, you're praying and we have our different activities. We have the coping skills that may have once been a little bit more successful than they typically are, and possibly not as effective right now. But, we're trusting him. We're trusting him, everyone. And that we know we're going to end up on the right side when it's all said and done.
Yeah.
That's awesome. We have another question here. Can my window be expanded, or is my window just like fixed? Can I expand my window of tolerance, or is it just fixed?
Yeah, gotcha. So great question. So your window is something, it kind of ebbs and flows. So the idea is for it to increase over time. So let's say maybe, unfortunately, you dealt with a lot of trauma as a child or something, you may have a shorter window of tolerance, but with, the proper, maybe it looks like going to therapy, whatever, the proper work, right? Emotional, psychological work, your window can expand. So in ways of doing that, again, is having those coping mechanisms in your toolbox, recognizing those triggers of when you're going up or when you're going down, and just having a baseline for yourself. So knowing what exactly does my baseline feel like and what does it feel like to be outside of that. So I think awareness really is probably the biggest way to increase your window of tolerance, but it does definitely ebb and flow depending on time or age and all of that.
Mm.
Okay, so how do I deal with my employees' stress factors when I'm under my own stress?
Yes, and so I also just want to, really quick before I answer that, be mindful of the time, because I think we're running a little low on time. So do I still have enough time to answer that question?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, so dealing with employee stress factors when you're under your own stress. So I think that sounds to me, the word that comes to my mind when I hear that question is boundaries. Boundaries are so important, especially when we're all dealing with things, we're all dealing with stress. And, I think sometimes it's easy to say like, oh, their problem is worse than mine or whatever it is. And the reality is that right now I think the very humbling thing about this whole the quarantine and COVID-19 is that we're all on some level under the same, under a level of stress, maybe not the same exact stressors, but under a level of stress. And so I think when it comes to work and dealing with employees, if you're feeling like you can't handle your employee stress that day, or you maybe can't hear another story, or you can't hear something else that's going to bring you down, it could be a matter of just saying, you know what, I care about your feelings, I validate your feelings, but for my own well-being, I can't listen right now. Is there another time that we can talk, or can we do this in a more productive way? Or is there another way that we can go about this? Because at the end of the day, the reality is you can't pour from an empty cup. And so continuing to be there for everyone else, ask yourself, how much are you being there for yourself? And do you have enough within yourself to be there for someone else? And if the answer is no, maybe thinking about how to build up those boundaries a little bit.
Good. So we said that was the last one, but we do have one more, one more question.
Yeah.
And after this question, so just to let everyone know that we'll be back again next Wednesday, same time.
We're not getting off the hook that easy.
Yeah, right.
So there'll be a series of topics that'll be underneath this whole banner, just trying to help everyone navigate, this new normal that we're all living in. So we're gonna allow them to answer this last topic, and just to be true to the time frame that we set aside, that 30 minutes, we'll end the questions, them answering questions, but you all can still text your questions to that 517-568-1629. And the questions that we don't answer tonight, we'll start that off next week, answering those questions. So please, if you think of anything once we end this session, please text your questions to that text number, and we will get those to you on next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Same time, same link. So the question is, how do we help kids with their stress?
Yes. Awesome question.
I think in a time where there are so many, we're so focused on activities with our children. You know, many of our children, they're involved in things at school, they're involved in things at church, their community. So the first thing that comes to mind for me is just number one, not overscheduling, just making sure that our children have manageable schedules. And so keeping that in mind, yeah, we want to keep them busy, but they don't have to be involved in everything, you know, every activity that's presented. Making sleep a priority. That's important. We have a niece. I have a niece. Tori has a cousin, and when she has not had her sleep, she's a different child. And so, just making sure that our young people are getting the proper amount of sleep. Teaching our young people to listen to their bodies. That may sound abstract, but understand, you know, being able to talk to our young people and say, you know, how are you feeling? Is everything okay? Maybe, you know, not every headache is just an excuse to get out of doing homework or cleaning their rooms or something like that. So helping children to be in tune with their body, and so that they're open enough to share with us when things may not be feeling right. And then I know this is going to be really obvious, but kind of the overarching theme, managing our own stress. Guess what? Our children pick up on what we give off, the vibe, the energy that we give off. And so if we're stressed out, guess what? We have stressed out children for no other reason than that's the energy in the household, in the car, you know, when you're picking up on the way home from church or wherever. So again, just managing our own stress and being calmer about situations as well. You add anything else?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is, I mean, you kind of already touched on this, but recognizing that children are human beings, right? I think a lot of times we think that they're like, oh, that's a child, and it kind of taking away some of their humanity a little bit. And the reality is that they are human beings. They still have emotions, they have feelings just like we do, right? And so, although they may not be able to communicate them as well, recognizing that they are experiencing emotions, feelings, thoughts, you know, as we all do. And so acknowledging that and being aware of that and checking in with them around that.
Well, we want to personally thank both of you all, Dr. Tammy and Sister Andrews from the we want to thank you. And again, this is designed to tap into the wealth of knowledge and experience that's in our congregation. And so we are just blessed to have so many of you all who are, you know, I know we don't like to say experts, but you have experience in particular fields. And I think this is a great time to listen at each other and learn from each other, lean in, as we say.